This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Jamie Glazov Moment. Tonight, leftist-fascist anti-Kavanaugh mob hysteria. What really lies behind the escalating Stalinist psychosis? Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Brett Kavanaugh has achieved victory. He's on the Supreme Court now. What an important victory of good over evil. Trump fought back. Kavanaugh fought back. Very important victory because we were up against some really morbid, weird, evil and pathology there in terms of these rape accusations and gang rape accusations. The presumption of innocence was thrown out the window. The Democrats' fangs and just their pathological, toxic hatred was unveiled. It was a very frightening, scary time. And there's a lot to say about it. But good, the forces of good prevailed. Kavanaugh made it into the Supreme Court. Trump really did something marvelous in fighting back, and Kavanaugh fought back. The Republicans fought back. And it was revealed how important it is to fight culture war and not to always be nice when the Democrats are fighting as viciously as they do. Now, that's another show. That's another 100 shows. Tonight, I want to narrow in on a certain phenomenon of these really weird and eerie protests. Now, I don't know if you've been watching on social media, but what's really happening in our society, we saw it with the quote-unquote Women's March after Trump won and all those people screaming and yelling. And we saw it after Kavanaugh, the Kavanaugh victory and how he made it into the Supreme Court. We saw all those demonstrations on social media, the videos, really scary stuff. And because I study totalitarian movements, I wanted to comment on them this evening. You know, there's some videos on there where the leftist leader or guru, the Stalinist figure, the Pol Pot figure, or the Red Guard, leader, the brown shirt leader is mouthing things. I don't know if you saw these videos. The leader is saying things, and then the leftists are repeating everything. So the leader's saying stuff, and then they're repeating. The leader's saying stuff, then they're repeating. And you see all the hysteria, the screaming. If the Supreme Court, when Kavanaugh was being brought into the Supreme Court and being sworn in, the protesters outside of the Supreme Court clawing, some of them were clawing at those big doors and then crying hysterically, sobbing, and all that strange shrieking. What is all that about? As I was watching it, my friend, something is definitely wrong. Something is definitely very frightening. There's a mass hysteria underway, a mass psychosis. You could say that has infected the left, but the left has always been infected. But in many ways now, the left is showing its stripes. Because it's very easy to come with a mask when you're winning, when you get your way. Even when you get your evil way, when you're evil and you're succeeding in your evil, you can smile. But now the left is not getting its way. The left, on certain realms, is not in power. It couldn't get what it wanted with Kavanaugh and the Supreme Court. It couldn't get what it wanted with Trump in power. And you see, the left believes that it's destined for power, that there's an entitlement there. The left believes that it should just be in power because they're the social redeemers. They're the self-appointed social redeemers of humanity. But as I was watching that, as I was watching all of that screaming and that hysteria and the clawing at those doors and all of that mass psychosis, I couldn't help of thinking about those Hitler videos when Hitler was giving those speeches. You just watch Hitler giving those speeches. And you know what? If a person was alone with Hitler in a room and Hitler said, hey, tell me what you think about this speech, and just started talking the way he was talking, an average human being after the speech would go, hey, buddy, I think you've got some problems. Maybe you should go see a therapist. But it's very interesting what happens in a crowd, right? And that's a whole other show. But there's a certain crowd, the totalitarianism of a crowd, especially in a certain environment. And when those Germans were clapping for Hitler during those speeches, during those demonic speeches of his, even though a lot of people argue that the German people, and of course I'm not saying it was all the German people, but there was a lot of Germans clapping for Hitler. Again, another show. But the fact of the matter is that Hitler had a lot of support, and when he was giving those speeches, if that's what you want to call them, there was a lot of howling and a lot of clapping. And even though many people in the crowd might not have consciously knew what he was going to do and what he wanted to do and what he was pursuing on doing, still in the subconscious mentality, people knew, because there was going to be blood. Because what Hitler represented was a certain rage and a thirst for human blood. And I wanted to share that with you this evening, because those people that were screaming at Kavanaugh, and when we see those crowds of leftists screaming with rage and ferocious hatred, the same thing when you've got Hitler up on the stage. The same thing in many respects when you watch those Stalinist marches as well, those videos of the Stalinist troops all marching in order. When you watch the North Korean troops also marching, that regimentation, that totalitarian regimentation, and the veneration of the totalitarian secular deity. Something very totalitarian is happening here in terms of that mass hysteria. And there is a thirst and a hunger for the blood of innocents. We see a certain Maoist cultural revolution taking place here. The Khmer Rouge killing fields, even though it's not happening now in terms of what Maoism turned into, in terms of what the Khmer Rouge turned into, but there was a reason why they called the Khmer Rouge Sartre's children. Because the blueprint for what the Khmer Rouge did was devised by French intellectuals in Parisian universities. So I would just like to say here that we're talking about a certain ideology and we're talking about a certain mass hysteria. So just think, if those protesters actually achieved power, imagine the people that were clawing at those Supreme Court doors. Imagine if they weren't just protesters that the police, thank God, could arrest and get out of there and put in jail for now. Imagine if those people took power. And they have in human history. In Nazi Germany, in Stalinist Russia, in Maoist China, the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, Castro's Cuba, Sandinista Nicaragua, North Vietnam, after taking over South Vietnam, what happened in terms of South Vietnam when communists took over. Imagine if these people protesting against Kavanaugh, imagine if they took over. Imagine if Pelosi and Cory Booker and Chuck Schumer and, you know, this creepy porn lawyer Avenatti, imagine if they had power, what they would do with that power. Certain phenomenon here as well, as I was discussing. There's a certain, and people call it a moral panic. There's a species here of the Salem witch trials. You know, I recommend those that have not studied it to study what happened with the Salem witch trials. But a certain mass hysteria can affect masses of people, and there's a species of that here. And what we see with the hashtag #MeToo movement and the leftist feminists, angrier than ever. And I just want to say here in terms of Me Too, that these totalitarian movements, they always come through the mantle of victimhood, that they care for victims. And we have to stand up to this, because this is huge BS, because the hashtag Me Too will try to say, oh, well, we care about the victims. No, it's actually our side that cares about the victims, because your side is trivializing real victims and pushing them into invisibility. You're doing tremendous harm to true victims in our world. And this hashtag Me Too movement, these leftist feminists that are just in a rage and just mass hysteria in the streets, in the anti-Kavanaugh protests, there's really something we have to look into here, because there's a mass totalitarianism and a mass hysteria happening in our culture in terms of what the left is fomenting. I wanted to make a quick comment on this. A lot of things are not allowed to be said anymore. You know, I was sitting with in a certain community the other day, and there's a very, very wonderful, graceful, elderly Christian woman was sitting in our midst while these things were actually on television. And there were these, you know, these leftist feminist students and their teachers, whatever. There was one video on, and they're just screaming and shouting, and they're so oppressed. And this particular elder lady says, you know, it's incredible too when the truth is spoken, the elephant in the room is revealed. But the lady said, what kind of man would even date one of these women? And I remember so many people laughed. And I said to my friend, I said, they're not. Because what's happening in our culture now is that a lot of these women are not going out with any men. And relationships are being broken. And masculinity is being taken out of our culture and out of our society. And there's a complete war going on masculinity, on the nuclear family, on even the sacred value of women having children and raising children. There's a war on that. And I just want to say, even though that if the things continue the way that they do, the police might even show up at my door in a few years for even saying these things. Because at the moment, what I'm going to say just gets you kicked off of social media, but who knows if the left will achieve what it's achieving. But I will say this, that when you see that mass hysteria and that panic fascist crusade, the rape panic fascist crusade, when you see that all in the streets and the way a lot of these Me Too and leftist feminists are behaving, part of the reason is because masculinity has been taken out of our culture. Men are being emasculated. Men are being pushed out. Manhood and masculinity are under attack. And the Prager University just did a very powerful video on this. Facebook even took it down. There had to be protests for the video to be put back up. But Prager Video did a video where a female commentator was saying how important masculinity is, not just for men and for society, but for women as well. My point here being is that this is connected. The more pathology you see of these leftist feminists, it's directly connected to the fact that masculinity and manhood and the real good, strong men have been taken out of their lives and are being taken out of our culture. And this is a taboo subject now that can't be brought up, and you're considered a terrible homophobe, Islamophobe, racist, what have you, for even saying such a thing today. Ladies and gentlemen, in this climate now, this rape panic fascist crusade, I would recommend you read an article by Christina Hoff Sommers. It was written a while ago, a few years ago, but still very, very relevant. Christina Hoff Sommers, she wrote an article called Rape Culture is a Panic Where Paranoia, Censorship, and False Accusation Flourish. Very strong article where she shows how all these falsely accused young men are increasingly being subject to kangaroo court justice now. And there's growing conspiracy feminists now, and all of this leftist fascist mob hysteria is escalating. And so, to conclude this evening, my friends, this is what you are witnessing is a Maoist cultural revolution on many levels underway. It's how the Khmer Rouge came into power. It's how they got started. And the saddest of all this, the tragedy here, is that we should never confuse and discredit genuine cases of abuse and violence and rape, because they are crucial and we do care about them. But it is this pathological force out there that's actually taking attention away from real victims and real cases of abuse. And that's a disgrace. That's a disgrace. And the hashtag MeToo movement the leftist feminists and all those leftists out in the street howling and screaming should be really, really ashamed of themselves, because what they're doing is pushing real victims and real cases of abuse and violence into invisibility. Ladies and gentlemen, fight back, fight for the truth, fight for innocence, fight on behalf of real victims. I have a book that's coming out called Jihadist Psychopath, and I show and reveal why phenomena like these are happening today. Because the jihadist psychopath, our terrorist and totalitarian enemy, is gaining control of our society. And the left is in league with the jihadist psychopath and brainwashing our society. If you read my book, you'll better understand and be able to fight against this mob hysteria that you see right in front of you today. And you'll be better able to defend our Western civilization. Thank you very much. See you soon on the next Jamie Glazov Moment. Good night.